Okay, so we got a couple minutes into it, so let's get started. And thank you, welcome everyone for joining us today at the Remote Teamwork Tools webinar. I'm just going to mention a few names here of people that could be presenting and let them introduce themselves. We have Grant Shonkwiler. I got myself after him, and I got Justin Woodward presenting, and then we should have about a quarter hour at the end of it. I haven't done a whole lot of practicing here, but rehearsing, but we should have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So Grant, I'll hand you the share.
All right.
And you can take it over.
Yep. One thing we'll mention, if you do have questions, we're going to do questions at the end. So, but if you haven't used Zoom webinar before, there is a Q&A button. Feel free to go ahead and start putting questions in there as they come up. And also, if you have a question that you don't think needs to be answered by all three of us, or everybody might need to hear if it's a more specific question, we can respond to that directly through there as well. So, cool. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Grant Shonkwiler. I'm going to be talking about a quick guide to transitioning to remote. First off, I'll introduce myself. That's me. These are pictures of me. This is my head. I like me. So I'm a former producer. I did software. I was at Epic Games and Megatouch Games. I was a lead designer and programmer before that. I've shipped 60 plus games and 15 plus technology products, 12 plus years of making games. And I currently do production, consulting, and contracting under my own company called Shonk Ventures, which again is my name because I'm a very self-absorbed person. Here's what I'm going to talk about. We just did the intro, and then I'm going to talk about transitioning to work and working from home or working remotely as an individual, and then quickly transitioning a team to working remotely. So a little story to open us up. In 2016, in the fall, I left Epic and I went on sabbatical. I traveled around the USA, then went to New Zealand and Australia to hike and work on a farm in the middle of the Pacific. I went from a hard schedule, a normal game developer schedule of way too many hours a week, to no schedule, and each day waking up and just going with the flow, doing whatever I wanted, going down a road, hiking up a hill, whatever it was. When I got back to the States, I decided to give the remote working consulting thing a go. I got my first client and I started to work, sort of. Next slide, there we go. The problem is, I didn't know what I was doing. It was so easy for me to get distracted that I was only working a few hours a week. I would work for an hour and then end up playing Skyrim, which was a 6-year-old game at that point, for 6 hours straight. After a few weeks, I decided it was time to figure out how to do this thing for real. And I'm going to share some of those tips that I painfully learned across my first year. So first section is personal transition. So the first thing I realized was I needed to get myself onto a schedule. Just like working a normal job in an office, you need to be on a schedule. So this is my current schedule. It's changed throughout the years, but this is where I am now. I wake up, I work out, I take a shower, I spend some quiet time meditating, I eat breakfast, and then I have a block of time that's my work time, and then I have lunch, and then I have another block of work time, and then I have a break in the afternoon. I'll go on a walk or play some games or something, and then I have another chunk of work time, and then I'm done. And when I hit done, I'm done. I turn off all of my communication and I stop working for the day. Allow yourself to work in bursts. It's easy to get distracted at first. Try 45 minutes of working and 15 minutes of break. Like I said, when I was just addicted to Skyrim, if I had started doing this sooner, I would have got out of that. So block out times on your calendar and keep track of the hours you plan to work. So each day I say I'm going to work X amount of time, and then I work to that time. Never chastise yourself for getting distracted. Put a time limit on the distraction, then jump back in. So when you feel yourself not focusing, just take a break. Walk around, do something. Move to my next point, which is move your body. Once an hour, get up and move around. When you're working in a studio, you tend to do this naturally for meetings, etc. You have to force it here. You have to get up and prioritize it. Prioritize sunshine and, if possible, fitness. Get moving for at least 30 minutes in a day or 5 minutes each hour. I was talking with somebody who's been quarantined for 3 weeks, and they said that they've upped their step count to 60 from 50. So just a reminder, keep moving. Build your environment. Set up a spot to work in. I have a laptop, so I have a couple different spots around my place that I work in. But if you're using a desktop, you really want to build an environment that you want to work in. If you have an office with a door that closes, that's best. Get in a zone and make sure the whole family or whoever you're living with knows you're not available. Like I said, if you have an office, you can just shut the door. That means don't come in. One big benefit that I've learned is the silent, uninterrupted times. It's a huge positive. I found myself not working with headphones for like 2 years until my wife started working from home, and now I have to wear headphones again. Over communicate. Keep any regular meetings you might have first off. Don't just get rid of things. You're like, oh, we're working from home. Get some face-to-face time daily with your team, and you have to over communicate compared to when you were in an office together. I'll talk a little bit about this stuff more when we get to the team challenges. So that's a summary for personal transition: create a routine, work in burst, move your body, build your environment, and over communicate. So for team transition, it's a little bit more, right? So this is really for people who are in a leadership role, in a management role, or just want to pass this information on. So as I said, keep your regular meetings, just replace them with digital meetings. There's plenty of tools. This is one that you can use to do that. Replicate any physical boards with digital boards. You know, if you have a task tracking software, hopefully that works. Clint's going to talk about a couple other tools after me. Make sure everyone on the team has at least 1 hour of overlapping time. This can be really huge, especially now that people have to teach their kids. Make sure that there's 1 hour that everybody is working so you can have meetings or that communication can happen. I was talking with the guys at Insomniac, and they said, you know, kids are out of school, so they pulled the company and decided that they would have a family time every day. I really love that. So you take a block of time every day, and people just spend it with their families or teaching their kids whatever they have to do. And a question that was asked of me earlier this week was, how do you figure out what the cadence is for meetings now that you're remote? Like I said, you have to over communicate. For me, I just try to keep that cadence that we were already doing, and then just kind of play it by ear and add in meetings as needed. But what I really have tried to do is limit the times that meetings can be made. So for the teams I work with, it's just the mornings. It's from 9 a.m. wherever we're centralized, so Eastern time, to 1 p.m. That's the only block of time that we schedule meetings. Communication, have channels. If you're using Discord or Slack or whatever, have channels for each strike team, scrum team to communicate, and then have channels also for each discipline to communicate so that they can talk about technical problems or share artwork or whatever it might be. Over communication is everything, and just over communicate everything and make sure it was heard. One thing that you're going to find is you're not going to have those crashes, right, where you're just walking down a hallway and you run into somebody and you can have a conversation. You have to intentionally start to communicate those things out. Reviews. There's a lot of tools out there for art reviews. One thing that people keep asking me is, how do you review builds? The best thing I've actually found lately is using a private Twitch stream or a mixed stream, and going from there. That works pretty well. Encourage lots of screen sharing. One thing that I found that people tend to miss is you can't look over somebody's shoulder and point, so make sure people are turning their cameras on and sharing their screens. So individual management. So this is probably the hardest part for people who are in a producer position or manager position to figure out. How do you manage individuals? So the first thing is give people large chunks of time to work on uninterrupted. In the book, we talk about no meetings days and silent hours. Give people big chunks, even whole days of time where they know they're not going to be interrupted by a bunch of meetings. Make sure that your workers who haven't worked remotely before understand how best to do it and are supported. You know, hit them with some of the stuff that I talked about at the beginning. Do a daily check-in with each person. It can be as simple as a good morning message. That's what I do when I get on or when I know they get on. Usually around the same time every day, I just say, hey, good morning. Do you need anything today? Just to make sure that they know you're there. Make sure you get face-to-face time with each person during the week. Obviously, you're probably not going to get face-to-face time every day with each person, but a little time during the week with each person just to look in the camera and have that face-to-face communication is really huge. The frequency of video communication over audio, I don't really enforce video communication except for in one-on-one type conversations, or more serious conversations. People don't feel like they have to get ready for work as much when they work from home, and when you're like, turn on your camera, and they haven't put on makeup or done their hair, or are wearing like a crappy t-shirt, that can be really awkward. So I try not to force video communication at all times. So a quick summary of that: keep your regular meetings, replicate any physical boards with digital boards, use channels for communication, keep reviews going and screen share, allow people to work, don't interrupt them as much as possible, check in daily, face-to-face time weekly, overlap work times, over communicate everything and make sure it is heard. So the last thing I want to say about that last bit though is there is a big problem that a lot of people are coming to me with, which is, I need to over communicate, and I have programmers specifically saying, stop talking to me because I can't get into that flow state. So I start every communication with, specifically programmers, with, hey, is now a good time to chat? And if they don't reply, obviously it's not. If they do and they say, oh, I'm a little flustered, then just make a note of the question that you have and move on, come back to it later. All right, that's my section. Again, we're going to do Q&A at the end. There's also a lot more in the book that we talk about in this kind of transition, and that's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions. All right, Clint.
Thank you, sir.
Back to you.
Okay, so my introduction here is I made games for about 20 years, and our studio in 2003 adopted Agile Scrum practices, and 5 years after that, starting in 2008, became a trainer and a coach. And so I go to about 15, 20 studios a year and talk about adopting Agile and Scrum and Kanban practices for game development. Got a new edition of my book, Agile Game Development, coming out this summer. Currently, family lives in Colorado, so we moved from California to Colorado, where there's less surfing, more mountain biking these days. And I got 2 college-age sons. One is here, got kicked out of college because of the pandemic. So he's working from his room. Hopefully not taking too much bandwidth today. Okay, so what I want to talk about was, of course, talking about applying Agile practices to game development, to remote work. And the 3 principles I'm going to be focusing on today is how do you maintain collaboration, self-organization, and transparency, which are really kind of critical to not only Agile teams, but most working groups themselves. So let's talk about collaboration here. So there's a lot of tools out there that really didn't exist, maybe 5 or 6 or maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that allow teams to collaborate, which is kind of to work together, kind of a shared vision for what they're working on, and have a say over what they're working on as well. So for example, if we're doing a release plan here, where we're trying to break down a fighting mechanic over the next 2 or 3 months of what we're going to do, is you can kind of establish that initial vision with the product owner, but then you hand this off to the team where they can kind of get in together and talk about, what kind of features are we going to add to this release, break things down, have discussion with the product owner, designers in the room, and kind of have create this shared understanding about what we're working on, and to participate in it, because a lot of times, the team will come up with some great ideas about what we can do in the next 2 or 3 months and how we're going to plan things. And so, maintaining collaboration through these tools. And the tool I'm using right now is one of my favorites. It's called Miro, M-I-R-O. And this entire presentation is done within a board of frames within Miro that do things like this. And I'm going to show a few others here as we're going along. Another favorite tool of mine is called Verbella. And what Verbella is they call themselves like a virtual reality meeting space, but it really doesn't require too much graphic power to it. It's kind of like Second Life. But it has a lot of these collaboration tools in here. And I think one of the surprising things I've learned using it is that, yeah, video is nice. You know, you can see somebody's face when you're talking to them, and it's much better communication path than just, you know, email or texting back and forth. But you still get that kind of same collaboration when you just have avatars with more generic faces in there. Yeah, it's very useful for not only doing kind of collaborative planning and things like that, but using it, we'll often get together like once a week, have a happy hour. Of course, the drinks are local to your desk, but we'll get together on a beach in Verbella and have good conversations. So there's a number of practices, as Grant pointed out in the book, for doing these, like dot voting, rank ordering, t-shirt sizing. Many of you have probably used Planning Poker. Lots of tools out there that support these things. There's planningpoker.com, for example, that allows a distributed team to conduct planning poker. So transparency is kind of a tricky thing, because you want to have transparency about what we're working on, what we're concerned about, what are the issues coming up. It can go too far in a little bit. So, you know, for example, here you have a Scrum task board. And the benefit of a Scrum task board is that everyone can manipulate the Scrum backlog within these tasks. And a number of tools that do this, like Trello is probably one of the more popular ones. Miro does it. Another one called Mural, M-U-R-A-L, does it, and does it most effectively. And in the case of Miro itself, is that this will tie into a Jira database. So if you happen to track either backlog in Jira, this will display a Jira task database as a set of cards. And so you don't have to worry about everyone on your team updating a Jira database, which we might not have licenses to. Some of the drawbacks of being transparent is what you measure. And you got to be a little careful about that, because a lot of times when we've seen when teams go to remote work, like all of a sudden, like a lot of us did 2 or 3 weeks ago, is that leadership can get kind of nervous. You know, it's, you know, what are people going to be doing when they go home? Are they going to be less effective? Are they going to be less efficient? Is there going to be a lot of distractions? And in many cases, yes, we're diving into working with our kids running around who are used to seeing, oh, well, mom or dad's home and that means I can have fun with them. Or you're worried about what's going on with this pandemic. So it takes a little bit of adjusting. And I've seen teams that do things like, you know, they share their burn down, they share their day-to-day task progress. And it winds up being the metric that they behave to, because management's paying too much attention to these things. And so I think in terms of, you know, what Grant said is better to check in, you know, touch base with people, see how they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Don't destroy trust by measuring these metrics like burn down velocity, sprint burn down velocity, because all you'll get out of it is just a straight burn down velocity. It really won't tell you the truth from an outside perspective about what's going on. And if any of you have read like the 5 dysfunctions of the team, you know, trust is the most essential element of building a functional team. So we don't want to tear trust apart by measuring the wrong things, enforcing the wrong metric. So a number of practices that relate to transparency that can help you on an iteration to iteration, day-to-day basis. A ton of them within the book itself. All right, so going to self-organization, again, it's tons of tools. In the book, we mentioned a lot of these graphic organizational tools, self-organizational tools, where if we're doing in sprint planning, we can just do Post-its. Pretty much every one of these tools I mentioned does interactive Post-its, where I've seen up to 100 people that are in the same room, that are manipulating Post-its, that are posting things on the wall, and then sorting things out and having discussions about, you know, what does this really mean? And you have your product owner, you have your designers in the same room that are answering questions. And again, the benefit is that transparency, is that shared understanding of what we're building, instead of trying to pass along a document or having that one producer that's assigning tasks and you know, people are fulfilling the tasks as they see, but because the communication isn't as direct when you're remote, much easier for individual teammates to kind of go off on their own direction and have a little bit longer time before we realize they didn't quite have the same vision that the person assigning the task did. So collaboration, like I said, is very key to teams that are even co-located, but it's essential for teams that are remote to find ways to gather for planning, especially. Grant mentioned having core hours, having an understanding about, how we work at home. People work differently. Kind of like Grant, where I like to take chunks of work, especially in the morning, and then maybe take early afternoon off and do some other things. Consider some of the stuff the problems that I ran into in the morning. And then I even like to work early evening. I get a lot of stuff done right after dinner. And people work differently, but having a tool like Doodle, for example, allows people to kind of fill in their times of day that maybe just start with, here's some opportunity for kind of some shared core hours, and kind of figure out, it's like, hey, is there a 1 hour per day that we can kind of agree on that we have as a core set of hours or hours that we're open to communication, as opposed to hours where I really want to focus and I do some of my best work by myself. And so plenty of tools like Doodle. Doodle is my favorite as well. Plenty of examples in the book. Silent hour, socializing the team, finding ways to get the team to just have a little social hour once a week. As I mentioned, Verbello is a great tool for that. Measuring team health, there's practices for doing that, kind of a retrospective, quick measure. How are you doing? How's things going on at home? How are you finding things that are working? And so just to kind of find a couple final tips, when you're first starting to do this, having a daily retrospective, at least for the first week, maybe for the first sprint, to kind of iron out some of the issues. Again, with self-organization, one of the key things is that the team has the power to make decisions, to adjust how they work. So on a day-to-day basis, just have a little quick conversation. It could be a 5-10 minute quick retrospective. What's working? What got in my way? What do we want to do a little bit differently tomorrow? Grant touched upon, tutor people on each tool. Let them come up to speed on things. Create some working agreements, which are common to agile teams about, hey, how do we work together? What's the best way to work together? And you're going to discover things with remote working, such as, all right, let's wear some shirts while we're doing it. I don't care about pants, can't see them, but let's wear some shirts next time. Or maybe leave the cameras on instead of having some people turn off video or discuss, what is the best way to communicate. As Grant mentioned, just realize that communication needs to be more explicit. Don't just send out one invite. Send out multiple invites. Remind people. Send direct links to how they can join things, like if you use Zoom or another conferencing system. And just be explicit in your communication. That's it for me. All right, Justin, you're up. You're muted.
All right, how's it going? Okay, let me present really quickly. Sorry. Okay. Right. How's everybody doing? My name is, you guys can see this, right? Okay, cool. My name is Justin Woodward. I work for Interrobang Entertainment, and I also own Interrobang Entertainment. So I'm an independent game developer. I also started a event coordination team called the Media Indie Exchange, and we work with independent game developers from all over the world to get visibility for their titles. We also help them with production, communicate with them, do business development, that sort of thing. I've been working in the area of video games for around 12 years now. Started my own company in 2009. Went on tour kind of with Clint early on, and that's how I learned about agile development methodologies, that type of thing, and started from the ground up, all of us working remotely, and then it just escalated from working at home, working on our own projects, to actually working out of IGN, and then out of working at a Double Fine, still with people remotely working out of different areas. So what I'm going to do is basically build upon some of the things that Grant talked about. This is after you've already established a workflow of how you want to work remotely, but then expanding upon a few of the principles when you already have the tools necessary to move forward. So WTF after the WFH, right? Usually it's work from home on Fridays. Now it's work from home everywhere. So from my perspective, it's based on survival, right? Like, I am not a huge company. I am getting money from Nintendo, possibly Microsoft, Humble Bundle, that type of thing to make ends meet. And sometimes those are far and few between. So we have to communicate as a team and make sure that we're moving forward. And that being the case, I have to prep for how do I manage things and move forward based on survival tactics. So I'll go over these four kind of ideas and areas, and then we could move forward with Q&A. So team composition, obviously, after you've established what you're going to be doing when you're working from home with your team, there's going to be a few changes, and the team composition is the foundation that helps move that forward really well. Personalities are part of that team composition, and you just have to narrow in on that aspect of it more, because you have to understand how people work and that type of thing. And then the other thing is maintaining momentum and morale when you're working from home and when you're working with teams. So the first thing is the team composition and foundation, of course, still based on survival. What I do is, and this is just one principle, can't go into all of them, but I keep 2 on deck at all times. So at least 2 people working together in each discipline at any given time, right? So I'm going to go into the but how, and then after that, I'll go into the why. But how? So basically, you create 2 teams. So the 2 on deck principle is if you have animators, you have 2 animators. If you have programmers, you have 2 programmers. If you have 2 designers, you have 2 designers. And then you basically move them in a pack 2 by 2, so they could communicate with each other. And if anything goes wrong, you can lean on one to help the other out. So you develop clear self-governing expectations for that. Check in with each team member on a regular basis, similar to what Grant said and what Clint said. And then you have team members check in with each other, and then you just have to step back sometimes because you want it to be self-governing, of course. I don't know why my camera went off, but all right, sorry. Matching complementary personalities is really important for this. And if you can't hire 2, have someone in the wings, monkey branch to them if you need to. Meaning, if you have a really small team, my team right now is 8 to 10. I have contractors who are always there in the wings that I'm working with. But at certain points, it will constrict down to having maybe 5 core team members. And if that's the case, then I'll always still communicate with people that I really like and enjoy in order to see how they could come in later when we have more funding, that type of thing. But why? It promotes self-governing democracy in a unified under one vision, right? So instead of me dictating things and being this like, you know, manager that's micromanaging everything, they're basically communicating and you're letting them have at it, right? You're communicating with them and they are dictating what they do inside the parameters that you give them, but they feel like they have more freedom and they can communicate and build a strong connection with each other. It allows others to do your work. I'm kind of kidding, but also not, because now you have more time to do things that you need to do in an independent development scenario. Like, I have to do business development. I have to communicate with first party, that type of thing. I have to figure out our marketing plan and so forth. So in that case, it helps when you establish 2 people focused on working on this particular part of the project, and they're able to communicate based on the management that you've defined, right? It also gives them ownership over portions of the project, and they feel free to establish kind of their vision within that portion as well as they're communicating with you. It also creates trust among the team, and defines deeper working relationships. And that's the biggest thing in the foundation is when you're working with a small team, they have to somewhat feel like family and really work together and build this team together. It also weeds out folks who aren't good to fit in the culture, right? So as you're working with them and you see you're okay, so basically you're communicating with each of them, you're communicating with everyone together, but then you're breaking out in different segments at different times. So for instance, on Tuesdays we have an environment call, environment art and design. We have an animation art and design call. We have a development art and design call on Tuesday, and these are all separated. And then when we have our sprint planning, then we all come together and communicate about that. Now, on the days that we're not communicating, because we do over communicate, but at the same time, I make sure that everyone has a breather or fresh air space to work. That team will work with each other, and they're basically dependent on one another. So if one of them isn't really holding their weight, they know that there's pressure from that other person, not just the whole team and not just me. So they will actually just back off. And it's important when you're working independently and you don't have all of these management layers to have that self-governing factor, and if someone is just like, oh, this shit ain't working, then sorry, I'm cursing, but if this isn't working, then they will fall back and actually drop off. And that's something that you actually need. So personality. So gauging personality and work style. But how? Over communicate to find out your team members' life habits. Like if, for instance, I'm just going to say some real team members. Felipe has a pregnant wife at home. He cooks for her, right? So I know that certain times he's not going to be able to communicate, and what is going to drive him over the top as far as his stress levels and that kind of thing, right? Evan lives with his parents, right? So at certain times he may have to get them food. He's taking care of them. But I know what those times are. I know the things that are stressing them out, so I can gauge accordingly. And everyone else does too, right? Because I want to make sure that these smaller teams are communicating with each other so they know each other's lifestyle, because that definitely has an effect while you're working remotely. Observe their work behavior without judgment. And at first, and I would say at first, because as you see as you gauge how they're working, like the kind of output they create while they're making things happen, you could see kind of where they're falling short, that type of thing, and then you could gauge it and you could help them build momentum. So after that, then you're judging, okay, which part of this is their life, what has changed, that kind of thing, so you can move forward. Help folks to adapt to a new familiar environment. So new and familiar, meaning it's new to them because they don't usually work at home, possibly, but it is a familiar environment because they are working at home, right? Because they know that environment. So they may need tips on how to do that properly, and communicating about that and knowing everyone's habits and them knowing each other's habits will help with that, reinforce that, right? Because they can give each other tips. Maximize their strength and reduce doubt. Use reality when necessary. So you want to make sure if they're good in spurts, you work within that strength, right? If they're good at long periods of time and getting stuff done at the last minute, you need to figure out how to curb that, but also work within those realms, right? And then use reality when necessary. Yo, this deadline's coming up. If you're as honest as me, money is running out. Like that's the reality, that sometimes needs to be told to folks to keep them moving forward. Share your own personality in life, selective honesty. So basically, I am always communicating and telling them things that are going on with my life as it pertains to their story, right? I'm not going to just say some random crazy stuff about me going to the strip club and I can't make something happen because of that, right? I'm going to be selective about it based on the person I'm talking to. But why? It allows to pair them with folks who are complementary. So if someone is really good at self-governing themselves and working alone, and one really needs to be dictated what the work is that they need to do, then that really helps, because one will help get them on track and the other one will allow for some space for creativity. Helps to understand their goals and to maximize drive. That's self-explanatory. Creates a clear understanding of work from home distractions and challenges. So if you know what challenges they're having, then you can help them with that. Strengthens their connection to the team, and helps you to identify problems before they occur. And that goes kind of back with weeding out folks that may not work with your team well. Morale and momentum. So this one is, once you've been working, and like I said, I've been doing this for maybe 10 years, working remotely with teams. You could see that, and independently, morale will dip. It'll go up, it'll dip, it'll go up, and it'll dip. So how do you do that? So something that we've communicated before, that I've communicated with Clint and Grant, is stacking wins. So when you don't have like a super, like a huge pot of cash, right? And you need to figure out how to keep your team going, sometimes off of fumes. You need to figure out what those wins are going to be that will stack against each other to keep everything moving in an organic way. So how? Define the timing when your team will need a win. So you could kind of, after working with a team for 6 months or more, you will know when those dips will occur, right? And you could plan for that. When will your team need a win? Plot that down, strategize that. Chill after a win. After you win, you hit this momentum, you could back off as a manager a little bit to allow them to observe that success, right? Build linked goals, leveraging natural wins. So that would mean basically like if there's E3 coming up, if there's an event coming up, that kind of thing. Strategize short-term combos and long-term combos. So what are short-term things? Can you do a play test just with the team? That's a goal. What are the short-term ones, and then what are the long-term ones? Define valuable showcases and events to show off progress. That's very huge, especially when people are kind of holed up and aren't able to show the world what they've been producing, and a lot of it is just code that no one gets to see. It's very important for people to actually get some kind of human interaction, even if it is remote, like we're practicing social distance and they're able to do a stream with the influencer, that type of thing. But why? Everyone wants to win. Everyone needs to win. I mean, they're in this because of the passion of loving to develop games and games itself. So them being able to win by showcasing their talent and their game is extremely important for the foundation of a team. It reinvigorates morale at times when there may be a slump. So if something happened that was wrong, you need to figure out how to stack those wins. Builds camaraderie and team spirit. Helps to set expectations. You knowing that there's going to be a win or a goal coming up, everyone has to build towards that together. It creates meaning behind the tools. Sometimes we kind of, as managers, we kind of get stuck in a rut where we're looking at all of these different tools. I use Jira, Trello, Google Docs, all these things, and we get stuck in complacency as far as like, well, we're doing this and this needs to be moved over and all that, and they don't actually get to see the outcome of that because they're not interested in the production aspect. They're only interested in what they're doing, and that is pretty much it. Let me see if I can get my camera back on. So make your team aware of hard deadlines, but do not let the hard deadlines dictate your culture.
Excellent. Thank you. Let me show up one more slide here. So that's a little conclusion slide, website for the book. And we have a mailing list there that we're going to continually update the tools that we might add in the future edition of the book. We're discussing having workshops, short workshops where we can work and coach with teams to get them up to speed on some of our favorite tools, the things that we do normally. Individual coaching with teams, more of these webinars, and Here is our individual emails if you need to reach us. And just to repeat, just just be careful, stay safe and healthy during this very strange time that we're living in. Okay, so that's what we got for Q&A here.
Cool. I'll go for the first one. Victor asked, how have you broached the topic of team members screen sharing their monitor? Would this be for the entire workday? How do team members respond to this? And just a reminder, you can use the Q&A tab to submit questions, and we'll go through those. So I'll answer the second part of your question first. Would this be for the entire workday? I have not found any value personally in sitting in a video chat with people all day, or sharing screens all day, right? If you think about working in a real life setting, you aren't sitting looking at your coworker 2 inches from your face all day. So I find that just to be very distracting and very big brothery. Some people have found that to be really value adding to do an hour or 2 a day, just so people get that camaraderie feel. I would say test that out with a small group of people to see if there's any value added there. As far as screen sharing, I usually bring that up as, hey, it's essential, right? If you think about how we work normally, people come over and look over the other person's shoulder to look at a model or to look at a line of code, whatever it might be. This is how we alleviate that. This is how we do that now. I haven't had any team members respond very negatively other than saying, hey, give me a few minutes to clean up my my desktop. Other than that, I have never had anybody react poorly. I can see where people would react poorly to the camera always being on, but to sharing the screen, I don't think that there would be any problem there.
Cool. I'll take Justin's question. He asked, what tools do you recommend for retrospectives? There's a ton of dedicated tools for retrospectives. One of my favorite that we'll bring into like a lean coffee or retrospective is it's called Retro. It's the website is reetro.io. I'll put that in the chat screen as well. But one of the things that that comes up with tools, and I've kind of settled on Miro, M-I-R-O, as a consistent tool, because especially with retrospectives, you want to be able to mix it up and design your own. I've seen just some really crazy retrospectives where they'll come up with different themes. Like one of the themes is Frogger, where it's just like we'll show a picture of a road, and you have a bunch of little frogs, and some frogs don't get across and they get squashed, and some get to the other side of the road, and we'll categorize and saying, what are the things that squashed us this sprint? And the reason for doing that is just kind of creates, it just mixes things up and gets people participating in it. But with tools, you just have to be concerned. I think one of the things that people don't realize is when we mentioned it with tutoring and getting people up to speed on tools, is the licensing requirements. Does a tool require people to have an account? Sometimes it's a paid account. Like I used to use Mural quite a bit. It sounds like Miro. It's spelled M-U-R-A-L. And it's very similar to Miro, but what Mural did was allowed anybody to check in and manipulate and edit a board. So you only had to have one license for like a Scrum Master or somebody facilitating the meeting. And Miro, M-I-R-O, just instituted that over the last couple of weeks, where you can just send a link out, let people who have the link join in and manipulate cards on the wall. Because with a retrospective, all you really need is a bunch of sticky notes and the ability to bring in images and set up very simple simple shapes and go from there. And so if you can find one tool like that, then it can be applied to a whole ton of things, from sprint planning to reviews to retrospectives, and you could just get people used to that one tool.
Clint, let me share the screen real quick, just so we can show off the section. So I'm just going to share. We do have in the book, we have a tools for remote work section, and this kind of goes into different tools. One thing that we did with this is we only put tools that we've used, that we know that work and you can use fairly easily. Otherwise, we would have just been copying and pasting a bunch of stuff off the internet. One of the questions was about online collaboration tools. So, you have a bunch of communication tools that you've probably heard of before, documentation, Google, Evernote, things like that. Here are some, the graphical collaboration things, and then cloud storage, and then tracking tools. And we talked a bit about the retrospective tools as well. Screen and video capture, you have Bandicam, perhaps screen presses. So there's a whole bunch of different tools out there. What we tried to hit in the book was just the ones that we know are successful and that we've used in our working remotely.
So I think that answers that question, the anonymous question.
Yeah, I see a question in the chat here. I'll go ahead and pop up and see if Justin has thoughts on it. How do I help my team members who feel overwhelmed by the new volume of communication?
I would reduce the communication to certain channels. Like at one point, we had Slack and Discord and we were using email. It was like at one point everyone shifted to Discord because it made it a lot easier, especially when they started expanding upon their video sharing options, and Slack didn't jump up and do that as quickly. So I try to reduce to the minimal amount of tools needed, like at any given point, because it just becomes overwhelming, because some people are over communicators and some people aren't, and some people just struggle with some of these tools. They're just not super technical people. We all have to be to some degree. Like for instance, artists on our team, one of the artists he's a what is it called, he draws all the animations by hand, frame by frame. He's a frame animator, right? He learned all the tools necessary to do that digital because that was a necessity to him. But him learning how to, add what is it called, epics to the Jira, it's like, how the hell? He's like struggling trying to manipulate that, and it's just like, why? He shouldn't have to do that. When I was saying like, two on deck, one of the other people on the animation team will have to take care of that, or I will have to take care of that. But that's just not him. It's just everyone else. It just gets overwhelming. There's too many things, and then they just can't focus on the task at hand. And I think that's the most important thing. What's coming out of this? If you're not getting results, then these tools don't mean anything.
Right. Yeah. And that question was from Jasmine, and kind of a similar question from Sai. I would say, one of the things that I found that's very successful is to just tell people to turn off their communication devices at times, right? So having silent hour, 1 or 2 hours a day where people are not messaging each other on Discord, on Slack, whatever it might be, not blowing up the channels, and then having full days where there aren't meetings and you're kind of telling people to slow down on communication. I know we kept saying over communicate, but for managers and producers, that's right. But for individual contributors, the over communication can be a lot. It can be too much. So you have to be very cognizant of whether they're actually getting any time to work. In fact, I had this exact thing happen a few weeks ago, where a programmer came to me and said, we're using Discord, and all these private chats had started on the side, and he said, this morning I was blocked doing any coding for 5 hours because I was getting interrupted by this, and this. And he showed me screenshots of all these people messaging him and stuff. So that was just a conversation that I went and had with everybody and said, hey, let's only talk about this stuff in the morning. If you're blocked, come to me. We'll figure out how we unblock you. I'm not trying to create barriers for communication there, but there is a time where you got to step up and be the shield, because your programmer has to code.
I would say, just to add to that, some of the best part of communication, or the most important part of communication, is not communicating at all, or knowing when not to communicate, and you evaluating who needs over communication and who doesn't need over communication. A lot of times more pragmatic and analytical folks don't need over communication. You need to like basically ping them and get hit back with, okay, they're okay in their own world, right? We'll communicate when we are all together, or like Grant said, removing barriers.
All right, so going through the QA here, this year asked, do you know of any online team games for team building and collaboration, and also give the team a chance to relax? You're asking the right guys, game developers here. We'll jump on Call of Duty and let's kill each other for a couple of hours. But that's a great question. I think it's some of these tools are trying to do it. Verbella is trying to do it a little bit, but they're not necessarily game developers. I know if you have a VR set, I like Game Center because they've got a scripting language for kind of creating any kind of game that you want. But I certainly think there's probably more that we could use that are more casual games that people could get into without, just developing skills and high adoption or a lot of time to get up to speed on the right weapons to shoot each other.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see a lot more of that.
The big one that I've been using a lot just for blowing off steam, just in general, not just with teams, is just playing Jackbox over Zoom or Discord or something like that. It's all played with your phones, right? It's super easy to do, and just kind of allows for that kind of fun time.
I would check out one more recommendation would be Sub Rosa. It's by Devolver Digital. It's kind of hidden, but it's like a heist game. It's got shooting involved, but you're basically trying to make deals with these other factions, and it's all physics based. But the interaction and the way that you communicate is pretty awesome, and it's definitely team building.
That's cool. Jason asks, how do you read or manage engagement in retros when working remotely? I found it much more difficult since we've been working from home. So the first thing is you have to activate everybody, right? So there's a lot more individual calling on people. Sometimes you know who those people are that have a bone to pick or a thing to say. Sometimes it's the quiet person who just doesn't talk. So I've been trying to do retrospectives with smaller groups, more within the Scrum team, and then as opposed to the entire team, which is what I would normally do. And then calling on each person and asking them to come prepared with one or two things to talk about, so that we make sure everybody's heard. Even if the person just says, I think everything went great, that's fine. That person is asked, they're engaged with, and you just have to be much more intentional. And also, I sometimes spend a little time following up with the people that I know really don't like to talk.
I'll just add to that we'll get together on Zoom and we'll use breakout rooms and then combine that with, I set up a template in Miro of the retrospective that we're going to do. Like I said, mixing it up and doing different approaches every single retrospective is key. And then send out these groups of 4 or 5s into a breakout room in Zoom. So they're all just the 4 or 5 of them are talking on video chat. And then they have their own dedicated Miro board that they can come up with the retrospective results of start, stop, and continue. And I find when people are in that small of a group, they don't get disengaged as easily.
All right, so there's one by Jenny. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thinking duty of care, what's your experience and thoughts on the value of using team mood type tools? Is it overkill? Yes. Yeah, I think I think these, like, everyone's already trying to maintain, and having any kind of like tools that manage mood or measure mood, it just seems like a little bit too much. And I think that, like, if you're managing folks, you should be able to communicate and gauge their mood by just talking to them. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, there's also some just some very simple polls you can do. We do a team health practice inside the book, where it's just keep it simple. Just just kind of go over things and just say vote red, yellow, or green. Green is everything's fine. Red is it's critical. and yellow means it's kind of trending a little bit poor. But just do something that just takes a couple minutes where people can just check in very quickly. But yeah, talking to people is probably the best. You can make it part of the, a daily check-in that Grant mentioned.
If I have oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and Jenny, if you're at a level where that's not feasible for you to talk to every individual person, then that team help you can do in your scrum of scrums or your leads meeting where, say I'm responsible for 4 people. I come in and I say, my people are yellow in mood right now. Here's why. Then you don't have to go in and check on individual people. I find that mood trackers tend to be more for anecdotal data, or, more for statistical data. I don't know, unless your team is massive, I think you can get through this with just your leads talking to their people and then them giving you these people are stressed out. Everybody's stressed out right now.
And so Yancey, I'll go to Yancey's question. Have you ever tried any sort of casual sync-ups over Skype or Zoom where teams can chat about life or hobbies outside of work? Any successes with this? And I'll just bring up Verbella again, is that we just started using that for just a casual get-together, Friday afternoons or Friday evenings, and everyone has their beer local, and we just kind of get together on this beach area, and you can get different groups of people. They throw soccer balls in there. You can kind of kick the soccer ball around. But it's just very natural to have this 3D avatar that you can say, well, let's talk to this group over here. I recognize the people, their names floating above. And then, all right, I see somebody over there that I know that I haven't chatted with for a while. And it's just a lot more natural, and it's a lot more smooth than something like Hangout or Zoom. So just give it a try.
One thing I'll add there is in the book we talk about how to set up your Discord or your Slack in ways to kind of get people to chat around the water cooler, is what we call it. So it is in the book. It is important to provide those spaces. One thing that I've found in every channel I'm in is there's like a server I'm in, there's a COVID channel, just because people need to vent. They need to talk about what's going on in the world. Cool. Jose asks, this sounds easy if your clients are not constantly breathing on your back. How do you handle this? How do you keep the customer at bay? So I've kind of been dealing with this a little bit with some of my clients, the people giving them money. So the conversation that we've been having is just very candid. Look, we're not, for anybody that's transitioning to working remotely, you're not going to be producing at 100% right now. There needs to be some patience. There needs to be some understanding. Let them know what you're doing to make sure that you can start producing at a higher percentage and start to get back to that 100%. I think right now people just need to give each other a little bit of empathy, right? We need to be a little more empathetic right now. So what I've been starting those conversations is trying to understand what from your instance, you're talking to the client, what the client is stressed about, because the client may be stressed about the fact that they don't have enough money for this to go X amount of time. Originally they told you they were going to give you $1 million, but because of world situations, now it's $500,000. And they're trying to figure out how to have that conversation with you. So what I've been doing is starting the conversation with, okay, where are you? How are you feeling right now? What are your thoughts on this? And start to figure that out. And then tell them, hey, you need a little bit of time to get your team in order. And things are not going to be, you may miss a build by 2 weeks or 3 weeks because of this. I hope that helps. That's how I've kind of been dealing with the situation, is going directly to the money people and having these conversations with them.
It's a very common problem with co-located teams too. Yeah, it's coaching the client as well, and understanding where this lack of trust comes from. Sometimes it takes maybe short iterations, and to get them more involved in things like planning our iterations, planning our sprints, and getting more involved in the product backlog, so that they can become less involved in what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And then saying, well, let's just try 1 week sprints. We'll have something to show. And if you don't have anything to show, let's look at why that is, and how can we deliver something that shows some value and communicate that to the clients on a regular basis. But it comes down to trust. and building trust so that, they don't demand that level of transparency, like, how many hours are you working a day, which very often does not translate directly into the value that they're getting from the team itself.
There was somebody mentioned there's an app, another VR meeting software called Roomy that's free right now. So if you're working in the VR space, that is something you can check out.
My VR is dedicated to Alex right now.
Nice. Cool. Well,
Remote
Clint,
communities of practice, the mailing list right now. And we'll figure that out as we go along.
Sorry, missed that one.
One more, Jose.
Jose, you said another thing, but we didn't get your question. If that, so we'll give you a minute to type that out. While we're waiting for that, thank you everybody for joining us. If you found this useful, please let us know. Shoot us an email or buy the book or whatever it might be. That'll help us understand if this was valuable.
Right. So we're going to record this and probably make it available. And again, thank you. And again, it stays safe and healthy. That are we good, guys?